Juan Carlos Osorio, is he the right fit for the Mexican national team manager? I think before giving an answer, fans have to take a step back and ask themselves an important question. Is he the right man to take them to that next level? Has the team improved under him? And is the team heading in the right direction for the future of the national side? Well, the goal here for Juan Carlos Osorio is this. There's three goals. And honestly, there are three goals for pretty much any manager out there. One is to improve upon Mexico's near calamitous World Cup qualifying campaign back in 2013. The other is to get Mexico to the World Cup, of course. And the third, and in the long term, most important goal, to get Mexico to be in that position where they can compete with and defeat the best teams in the world, cementing themselves as one of the best teams in the world, and making a deep run into international tournaments, specifically and especially the World Cup. Now, looking at those three goals and analyzing Osorio's tenure as the manager, I think he's got a check mark next to two of those three boxes. Mexico right now in CONCACAF Hex qualifying, the second to last round of World Cup qualifying for CONCACAF, the other of that being the international playoff between the fourth placed side and the team from Asia. Mexico sits with 14 points from 6 games, 60% of the way completed, with 4 games remaining. They have already surpassed the points they had accumulated in the 2013 cycle, where they finished with 11 points from 10 games, with only 2 wins, 5 draws, and 3 losses. Horrible. So right now, Mexico is sitting on top of the Hex. They've already passed that subpar finishing in the last World Cup qualifying cycle. And Mexico is poised, they're in a position right now to win the Hex, to finish first at the end of qualification for the first time since 1998. Remarkable, considering that Mexico are usually at the top of the region. But since 2002, I believe the United States and Costa Rica have always been winners of the Hex, finishing in first from the region to qualify directly for the World Cup. Mexico has not finished first since 1998. They are on the verge of doing that now under Osorio. So just going off of that right away, there is improvement from the previous qualifying cycle under Chepo de la Torre and the whole cycle of managers they went through before settling on Miguel Herrera, who led them to the World Cup and then the Gold Cup later on the year after that. But the third question of, is he taking Mexico to that next level to where they can compete with the best sides in the world? I'm going to answer that question towards the end of this video, where I give my verdict on whether he should stay or should he go. But looking at some statistics of Juan Carlos Osorio's stint as the Mexican national manager, he has oversaw 35 games. 23 of them have ended up in wins, 6 draws, 6 losses. 23 wins, 6 draws, 6 losses, for a win percentage of 67.65%. That's pretty remarkable, right? He's won 2/3 of Mexico's games in charge. And this is a statistic that not very many Mexican national team managers in the past have had. De La Torre, Miguel Herrera, I think a lot of them averaged somewhere in the 50 percentile area. So he has won most of his games in charge of Mexico. But if you break it down and look at who the opposition was in all 35 games of under Osorio's wing, most of them came against CONCACAF opposition in teams like Canada, El Salvador, Honduras, friendlies against other CONCACAF opponents, and also World Cup qualification in the hexagonal. But on the same token, if Mexico is a CONCACAF team, they can only play against CONCACAF teams. So saying that Osorio has only really defeated CONCACAF sides would be sort of true, but not taken out of context, because you can only beat what's put in front of you. If you're from a region of the world, most of your games are most likely going to be against your regional rivals in that part of the world. So there's a little bit of a balance here that needs to be struck in analyzing his win record. Now, Osorio has also registered a couple of impressive friendly victories over some pretty good second-tier European sides, Iceland being one of them. He has also beaten South American opposition in Paraguay and another team that I can't remember off the top of my head. But the ultimate test for the Mexican national team is how the team performs in international competition, specifically in tournaments. Now, he has seen 2 tournaments under his wing, both coming this summer, the Confederations Cup and the CONCACAF Gold Cup. The goal in the Confederations Cup was to get to the semifinals. They got to the semifinals. They defeated host nation Russia. They drew with the European champions Portugal. They came out of the group with 7 points, which was probably more than most people thought they were going to come out with. I thought they would come out with 5 points. 4 or 5 points seemed to be the expectation, but Osorio did exceed expectations in the Confederations Cup as far as the group stages are concerned. So, getting to the semifinals, almost winning the third-placed match, finishing bronze, except for a stoppage-time equalizer by Pepe in the rematch against Portugal in the third, fourth-placed playoff game. Portugal then went on to win 2-1 in extra time. But Mexico came very close to getting the bronze medal at this year's Confederations Cup. But if you break down, and again, context here is important because it's not just about what results say on paper, it's how you got those results that are important. And if you break down Mexico's overall performance in the Confederations Cup, for a lot of fans and for the Mexican critics and the media and the federation, it was disappointing. There were alarm bells being raised. There were a lot of signs of concern because Mexico had conceded first in all 4 of their Confederations Cup. No, excuse me, all 5, with the exception of the third-placed game. Excuse me. So their first 4 games of the Confederations Cup, they conceded first. The manner in which they had to come back in their games against Russia and New Zealand were startling, considering the fact that Mexico is separated from Russia and New Zealand by a considerable margin in overall quality and in the world rankings. Osorio's tinkering of lineups almost cost them that match against New Zealand. I said in my post-match reaction for that a month or so ago, I think, maybe more, that Mexico did not win that match because of Osorio. Mexico won that match against New Zealand in spite of Osorio, going into the halftime 1-0 down to New Zealand, and if not for some poor finishing by Chris Wood, arguably could have been down 2 or more goals, and probably would have lost that match. Starting off the game very poorly against Russia, going behind early, being on the back foot for long stretches of that game. Yes, it's the host nation, but it's a host that you are superior to. You should beat Russia. You look at Mexico, how they performed overall in the Confederations Cup. There were glimmers of hope, though. There were moments of genius on behalf of the team. There were bright spots. The fact that Mexico came from behind in all three of their group games to get a result is the hallmark of a team that is it's a hallmark of a team that knows how to grind out a result in tough situations. It's a hallmark of a team that shows grit and determination and the ability to come back when their back are pushed against the corner. Coming from behind to tie Portugal, coming from behind to beat New Zealand, coming from behind to beat Russia, almost defeating the European champions in the third placed game. Then you look at the Gold Cup, and here I'm a little bit hesitant to hold Osorio's feet to the fire in the Gold Cup because he did send a C team. Now, he can use that as leverage, as an excuse, saying, well, I sent a depleted squad because the main focus was the Confederations Cup. Yes, but I would also have held the Gold Cup against him if Mexico had failed to reach at least the semifinals. If Osorio's Mexico did not reach the semifinals, at least in the Gold Cup with their C team, I would be calling for him to be axed, to be dismissed, to be relieved of his duties. Like that. I wouldn't even be making a video this long talking about it. You break down into context, they lost against a Jamaican team that was very familiar with them, that it was not their strongest squad either, but it was still more compact and it was stronger than Mexico's C team because this was Jamaica's B-plus team. So I forgive Osorio and I give him some leeway for losing to Jamaica in that semifinal. If they had lost to a team like a Curacao, then we'd be having a very different discussion right now. But they lost to a team that they had played 3 or 4 times in the last 2 or 3 tournaments. That pretty much knew how to play against them, that had their number, that was very familiar with them. So I can understand. I don't think there's any shame in Mexican C team. Excuse me, I hiccups. A Mexican C team losing to a Jamaican B-plus team. I don't think there's any shame in that. But I also think it's kind of dicey. It's hard to break it down into full context because Osorio can use that excuse. Let me explain like this. If he had brought that whole roster from the Confederations Cup to the Gold Cup and he loses the Gold Cup, doesn't get to the final, he's gone. I think the Mexican Federation sacks him. And I think that he would be held more accountable for that unfolding. What worries me about Osorio is his constant tinkering of lineups that has placed Mexico in undesirable situations that have been almost costly in the 2 major tournaments under his wing. And arguably, if you make as many changes as you did in that New Zealand match, you take that to a World Cup group stage, that could mean all the difference between you advancing or going home. I understand the importance to experiment with lineups. I understand the importance of trying to find your right starting 11 to find what clicks for your national team. But you don't do that in a major international tournament. You do that in friendlies and in competitive World Cup qualifying games that prepare you for major international tournaments. He thought that, well, this is New Zealand, I can get away with it. And he got away with it because his players bailed him out, not the other way around. New Zealand almost beat Mexico. New Zealand arguably should have beaten Mexico. So I'm a little worried. If he brings that same mentality to a World Cup group stage, yeah, it could pay off in his favor. Like I said, it's a gamble. It could prove off to make a couple of vital substitutions that gives Mexico a win over a big team. But if you look at the risk factor involved, are those kind of decisions worth it in major international tournaments? Because it can backfire on you easily. And I look at Osorio, and the most important question, not even just the tinkering, but going back to the third question I raised at the beginning of this video, does Osorio seem to be the right man who is taking Mexico to that next level to be able to beat the best teams in the world? Here's what I think. I think Osorio has brought Mexico back at or near the top of the CONCACAF region. I think he has made Mexico a better version of themselves in that he now has sort of solved the puzzle of healing Mexico's previous World Cup qualifying struggles, because they didn't just struggle in 2014. They struggled in the 2010 World Cup qualifying cycle, at least in the beginning. And they almost didn't qualify for the 2002 World Cup because they also had a really bad start. People forget the 2002 World Cup qualifying cycle for Mexico was almost as bad as the 2014 cycle. So Mexico has actually struggled, at the very least, in the initial stages of World Cup qualifying in 3 of the last 4 cycles. That seems to have come to an end under Osorio. My opinion of Osorio is he has returned Mexico to the dominance of the CONCACAF region and has gotten them good enough to the point where they can compete with and defeat the bottom tier sides in South America and second tier teams in Europe, but he has not taken them to the promised land, so to speak, that one glass ceiling that Mexico has been trying to break in not just competing with, but defeating the very best teams in the world. You can say, well, it's a talent issue. It could be, but I think the Liga MX domestically produces a lot of talent. I don't know. I know the Liga MX is arguably more competitive than several leagues that you will find in some of these South American countries. I'm not saying they're better. I'm saying that they are just as competitive. The Liga MX is arguably up there, along with some of the best divisions in the South American region. I think it's mostly a managerial issue, and I think it's mostly a psychological issue. And do I think Osorio has brought Mexico, or at least hinted of bringing Mexico to that level to compete with Brazil, Argentina, Spain, France, Germany, Italy? I don't think so. Is he the right one to do it? It's not looking like he is so far. But here's the tricky part. He may not be the right one to take Mexico to that new, uncrossed, uncharted land, that threshold. But do you just fire him now when they're doing really well in World Cup qualifying? That would potentially throw the whole team into chaos, because you get rid of a national manager on bad terms. It could disrupt their rhythm, their smooth qualifying process so far. So it's very dicey. It's hard to decide if he should go right now. If the goal is to get to the World Cup and just to assert its dominance on the CONCACAF region, he passes. But Mexican fans are tired of just that. They want to move up. They want to move up the ladder. They want to move up the food chain. They want to start being able to make a case for a World Cup quarterfinal. Mexico made the quarterfinals twice in 1970 and 1986, but they want to get back to a quarterfinal. They want to get to a semifinal. They want to eventually get to a final and win a World Cup one day, no matter how far away from that might be. And I don't think he's the one to take him there. And if that is the most important long-term goal, then in the short term, he is the right man for the job. But it'll just be more of the same, and he'll get Mexico performing at the typical Mexican expectations that we have for this team already. But for the long-term goal, do I think he's the right man for the job? Do I think he's going to take him there? I don't think so. I don't think so. But they're so far deep into the World Cup qualifying process now that do they just get rid of him now, a few months before it wraps up? It's tricky. I would say maybe not fire him now. No, you know what? No, I don't think he's the right one for the job. I don't think he's horrible, as a lot of Mexican fans say. I don't think he's horrible, but I don't think he's the right one to take them to that next level. I don't. So I think he should. I think he should go. I really do think Juan Carlos Osorio. I think Mexico needs to find a better manager with the goal in mind to dream big and take Mexico far into a World